Albert, let's just get right to it. We're at the bottom of the NFC West, which means,
Hmm.
surprisingly, the San Francisco 49ers at 6 and 11. Not the team, not the offseason I thought they would have. This team had a lot of older guys. I thought that they were going to bring it back for kind of one more stretch run, but a lot like DeMeco Ryans and the Texans, it was getting rid of some people. It was kind of trimming the fat on this roster to try to make it better for the future and still have to pay Brock Purdy. So a lot of needs actually coming into this one.
Yeah, and they've got a ton of capital too. Their first round pick, their second round pick. It's the first time they've been picking this high in a while for obvious reasons. 2/3, 2/4, 2/5, and then I think it's 3/7.
3/7.
So
Yep.
they've got a ton of capital to work with, and I think the mistake that a lot of people have been making talking about them is that like this is some sort of tear down. I think it's the same kind of reset the Rams went through a couple of years ago. The Bills went through last year. Um, I think they were going to have to do this at some point. And they're carrying, I think, $85 million in dead money. They had just mortgaged. They had mortgaged so many contracts over the years to try to keep that group together. And it's a good problem to have, but eventually you have to address it. And so, I think they were looking at the age of their core and saying, like, this isn't going to last forever. You're obviously moving into an area where you're going to pay your quarterback now. And I think that it just sort of matched up for them that this is the time to do it. Now comes the hard part, which the hard part is, if you look at like what Buffalo and the Rams did, so much of it came down to in making it work. And both those teams, by the way, made the playoffs with $75 million in dead cap money.
Right.
So much of it was just hitting on draft picks, and
Right.
having guys on the roster that are really cheap that make up for all the money you're spending, all the money that's allotted, the cap money that's allotted to players who aren't on the team anymore. So pressure's on John Lynch and his group to get it right in the draft. They got a lot of capital to do it with.
Very typically 49ers, your pick number 100 is a comp pick 138 is a comp pick 249 and pick 252 are comp picks. We'll see if they end up using all those or if they end up experimenting and trying to flip some of them. But when I look at this roster right now, I mean, nothing stands out to me more than the defensive line and basically everything around Nick Bosa, right? I mean,
Yep.
I think that jumps out to me immediately, right?
Yeah, I'd say that's one thing for sure. And I think that this is a good draft to need defensive linemen in. So does that mean they're looking at an edge player? I can't imagine Mason Graham gets them, but you look at the depth at defensive tackle. I certainly could see a scenario where they go edge rusher to pair with Nick Bosa in round one, and then come back with a defensive tackle with the depth of that position in round two. Or I think the other thing you have to look at here is offensive tackle. And Trent Williams isn't going to play forever, and they let another guy they developed behind him go, and Jalen Moore this offseason. So. I almost feel like ideally you get maybe a guy like if things work out a certain way, and maybe it's like an Armand Membu or a Kelvin Banks, where maybe you get a guy that you think can contribute for you at guard in the beginning, and then eventually he grows into being your replacement at left tackle for Trent Williams, because I do think that that's something that's sort of hanging over them and. Something they're going to have to address. And again, it's like they've been so successful that I don't know that they can really count on being at this point of the draft where they have the 11th pick very often. And that's generally where you need to be. You need to be up high to get an offensive tackle that you can put in there at that left tackle spot.
That defensive line spot is crazy because to me, so in 2024, they brought in Leonard Floyd, they brought in Gross Matos, they had Jordan Elliott, they had Malik Collins, but now Javon Hargrave is gone. And so it's just been kind of a constant shuffle for them after they ended up building one of the best defensive lines in the sport. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that this unit was essentially automatically collapsing other offensive lines. But you're right. I mean, offensive line is an issue. And then to lose Dre Greenlaw from the middle of that defense is also not an insignificant thing. And if you have an off-ball linebacker with those leadership qualities, with those capabilities on tap in the draft, that's someone that you have to take a look at too.
Yeah, and I think it's like another area where you go back to their history, right? Like they got Dre Greenlaw, they got Fred Warner outside the first round, right? So they've been able to find guys to fill those positions in the past. If you look at like John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan's history in the draft, like outside of the Trey Lance thing, They took Javon Kinlaw near the top 10. Was it 12th overall somewhere, right? Like I think
Yes,
that
I
was
think it
the
was
Colts
12th.
pick for
Yeah.
DeForest Buckner, if I remember right. Nick Bosa, Mike McGlinchey, like they've generally, I mean, even like going back to their very first draft with Solomon Thomas, who they took, was it second or was it third
Second.
overall? Third overall, because they traded down one spot, right? Because then the Bears come
Oh,
up.
that's right.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So, like, if you look, like, when they've been in the top half of the first round, they've generally invested in the lines of scrimmage. And so, whether it's offensive line or defensive line, I think everything sort of points in that direction with them.
Yeah, they've picked in the Shanahan
I
era
wouldn't rule
7.
out corner either. Corner's just something
Sure.
like they lost Travarius Ward. Like, so, like, that's something you could look at too.
Yeah, in the Shanahan era, they've picked third. They've picked 9th, second, 14th, third. Third was the Trey Lance pick.
Yep.
And then not in the first round, and Ricky Pearsall. So you need, I mean, they were obviously going for it, right? And this is kind of that situation now where you have to replenish a little bit. Don't call it a rebuild, though. Next is Arizona Cardinals, 8-9. I don't see another team, and I hate that it's being put this way. I really do. I hate that it's being put as a make or break season for the Cardinals. Like, Jonathan Gannon inherited probably the worst team in the NFL, both in terms of emotional health and in terms of roster health. We didn't know what was going on with Kyler Murray at that point and stood behind him. And all they've done is get better every year. They went from a 4-win team to an 8-win team, and now we're talking about them as if they don't win the NFC West, that this is all of a sudden a failed experiment, which I think is absolutely ridiculous. But that doesn't mean that they don't have needs, and they've already spent big in free agency. Jonathan Gannon trying to bring in some bigger names like Josh Sweat, but they still need edge help. To me, they need offensive line help. They need someone to pair with Marvin Harrison at wide receiver. I think that there's a lot of different ways that the Cardinals can go here.
Sure. I mean, I might even throw like a little corner in there as well. Max Melton, I think, has been like they may have something there, but like you look at the depth, and they're really invested in young players too. Like that's, I think, what makes them a little bit unpredictable is like these first and second year guys. They have so many of them, right? But like it's all going to be like a lot of this is going to boil down to their own internal evaluation of a lot of those guys and where those guys are after year one or year two. So. Like if you're in the building, how do you view, how do you view Garrett Williams? How do you view, like I said, Max Melton? Like I think those are fair questions to ask. Where they're picking. I mean, this is the first time, of course, since Jonathan Gannon and Monty Ossenfort have been there that they're not like flush with picks. The last couple of years they were. So like picking 16th overall. I think they're sort of in a position to let the draft come to them.
Yeah.
With what's available, the edge rushers are the top two corners gone, Jedi Barron and Will Johnson. Some of the interior offensive linemen, like a Gray Zabel or a Tyler Booker, are those guys available? I think they're sort of in a position where they've got a good young base of talent and they can kind of let the draft come to them because they've got enough needs where it's, we can get we're going to get a good player at a spot where we could use one in all likelihood.
This offensive line is pretty good. I mean, and has been.
I think the tackle situation. I mean, that's why I said the interior guys. The tackle situation is really good.
Yeah.
So I mean, like if you're looking at like really turning that into a strength, like a Tyler Booker could be really good. You know. So like that's something I think you look at, and then. They did invest in Josh Sweat and Baron Browning on the edges with new deals. I still think like I don't know that either of those guys are the guys that like as good as Sweat was in the playoffs for the Eagles. I still don't know that like that's the guy you're going to circle and say like, yeah, that's like the one that the other offense is going to be worried about, coming in on a week to week basis. So
Jalen Carter makes everyone a little bit better.
Right. So, like, are you looking at Shamar Stewart or somebody like that if you're Arizona? I think that's certainly be in play, too.
And you make a good point, too. I mean, I think that's something that deserves to be said is, like, we don't know about the internals. And, you can go into, for example, we're looking at, I'm looking at a depth chart, right, as I'm talking and on Pro Football Focus, for example. And that's not what I'm basing what I think their needs are off of, but it just helps. They have a handy tool. So it looks that I can see the roster while I'm talking. And, for example, they have Greg Dortch as like the 77th best wide receiver in the NFL. And I think that sometimes that produces the conversation that the Cardinals need help at wide receiver when internally they love Greg Dortch. Like he's one of their
Yeah.
favorite players in the building. And so, I think sometimes our concept of need and team's concept of needs are different. And I do think that's,
Yeah. And I do think like they've done a nice job the last couple of years of like not, I don't think they've let their needs like dictate what they do. They've really just, I think, focused on getting good players in the roster. And I think like if you are getting the performance out of the guys that you've drafted, and like you look at obviously the frontline guys like Paris Johnson and Marvin Harrison, it feels like they've done a nice job of sort of focusing early in the draft on tying up premium positions and positions that, like you're going to say like, okay, like this guy can be a cornerstone for the next 10 years, which I think is why like corner and edge rusher have to be part of the conversation here. Cause it is, the early history that they've shown us.
Seattle Seahawks, I think, are a little bit more, we can bang the nail on, we can bang the hammer on the nail here. It's offensive line. I think that they need help. Charles Cross was a great pick. That to me is the last time, I don't know, when's the last time you remember the Seahawks having like an anchor tackle outside of,
they really struggled with that. Like after Russell Okung, like they really,
they made the trade with Houston and you shore it up momentarily. But
but Dwayne Brown was kind of like a stopgap there,
right.
And it almost felt like a Walter Jones situation where it was like, is he going to come back? Is he not going to come back? Not that Dwayne Brown's a really good player, but he wasn't Walter Jones. But yeah, it does like Charles Cross, I think, is one of the better left tackles in football. So you have that tied up. I think I look at it like Abe Lucas as like he's talented, and I know that they hope they can get more out of him. And so there's still like high hopes for him. To me, the interior guys are the ones you're looking at, and that was a real dumpster fire for them. So I look like the Seahawks are coming in a position of strength. I think they've got a nice base of young talent. They've also got 5 of the top 92 picks as a result of the DK and Geno trades.
Wow.
So I like you can kind of look at it for them as like a mosaic where it's like, all right, like if we do this, then what player at this position is going to be available in the second or third round because they've got so much capital. But Gray Zabel makes a lot of sense. Like if you're looking at like if you're looking at like a Mike McDonald, like tough guy, and this guy, like the more
plays
people
anywhere.
The more people I've talked to the last few days, like when Gray Zabel's name comes up, like it's almost like their voice lights up on the phone. You know what I mean? Like, and he can play 4 positions. You can probably put him anywhere but left tackle. He could be your center. He could play either guard spot. Like Gray Zabel feels like for this team's needs and like where they're picking, it feels like that would be a really nice match.
So they have 18, they have 50, they have 52, they have 82, 92, and then their run of comp picks is ridiculous too. It starts 137, 172, and 175. Would any of us freak out? Honestly, if half of these picks ended up being spent on interior offensive linemen, then you just make these guys old school Seattle, like compete for your spot. I don't care who wins. The first round pick can win, the third round pick can win, the fifth round pick can win. We just have to have the best guys, because my one fear is if you're running this kind of Kubiak style offense and you have Sam Darnold and he's going to be booting out all the time, the one thing that destroys that offense is really fast upfield interior pressure. And so can you afford to not absolutely demolish this position in the draft? I don't think so.
And I think I wouldn't be surprised if we see like Gray Zabel in the first round and then a center in the third round. You know what I mean? Like that wouldn't surprise me at all. And I think edge rusher is another position I would just kind of keep an eye on for them. They've got a couple older players in Nwosu and DeMarcus Lawrence at those spots. So, do they look to get a young guy in the pipeline there? If the draft falls a certain way, like, I don't know, again, like you look at McDonald's background in Baltimore and how they like the power edge rusher, you know what I mean? Like the Terrell Suggs being the prototype for that. Like that's another one where I bring up like a Shamar Stewart or a Mikael Williams, where it's like, if you want like the big prototype, there are a couple of guys that they haven't produced at that level that you'd like them to, but they really fit like what you'd be looking for at that position,
I
like
think
size and speed and all that wise.
given, I mean, you mentioning Mike McDonald, you have to also put secondary in there, right?
Yep.
And because in Baltimore, he had so many options to play with, and you could make a safety look like a corner, you could make a corner look like a safety, you could play so many tricks on an opposing quarterback, and I think he just lacks. I mean, Baltimore is so rich, was so rich, over in certain times at that position. I think he's got a ways to go to build up something like that, but maybe whatever. You got Cam Chancellor in the 5th round when you were John Schneider.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I think you still have to look at like the Michigan guys too, like in that regard. So it's like, I mean, like because of McDonald's background there and his relationship with Jesse Minter, who coached a lot of the guys who were on defense there at Michigan, and I think Will Johnson, I mean, would be an interesting name for them. I actually think like if you're talking the other corner that's going to go like relatively high, like Jedi Barron, if you're talking about like a flexible piece and a guy who can do a lot of different things, he might make some sense. The issue with him, I think, with them would be they already have Weatherspoon, who's like best position is inside, and Barron's best position might be inside too. So like that might be the only issue with that one.
Los Angeles Rams at 10-7, such a weird team because on one hand you're like, they need a lot of work, and on the other you're like, they were about 2 plays away from beating the Eagles in the NFC. In the NFC divisional game, and then I think they probably would have smoked the Commanders too if they got them in the conference title game. Here's another one where, again, I mean, if you were to, and I'm not knocking, it's going to sound like I'm knocking PFF. I'm not. I love PFF, but if you go by PFF, right, Braden Fisk is the 66th best defensive interior. I thought Braden Fisk had a phenomenal year last year, and Byron Young they were down on too, and I thought Byron Young had a great year. I don't think that they're drafting at need for those positions, even though and I'm trying to speak from a fan perspective because I think sometimes that's where the perception of need comes from. And I think it's just different. For example, like I think that they could use some help at off-ball linebacker. I think that they could use some help at cornerback. And if you're in a Sean McVay system, I don't think you're ever done churning, especially your interior offensive line. Like that, I think they had it in a good spot. I think they have it in a good spot, but I don't think you're ever done hammering that position.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously addressed it like last year in the offseason. The Jonah Jackson signing didn't work out, but
right.
Dotson did, and they've got Avila in there, and Bo Limmer looks like he's going to be a pretty good center for them. Like so I'm with you on corner. I think corner is something that they really, I don't know, they fully had that tied up. They've sort of had it duct taped together since they traded Jalen Ramsey away. So they could use a young player there. I'm with you with the off-ball linebacker thing. I also wonder about adding a young skill player somewhere.
Yeah.
And they were really hot after Brock Bowers last year. And I sort of wonder if McVay is looking for that in his offense again. And it feels to me like they're going to be out of range for Colston Loveland, but that would be a name. The other thing that they could add, because they've got Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua and Tutu Atwell's there. But if they wanted to add a speed element, if Matthew Golden got to them. And then I think the other thing is, what about a quarterback?
Yeah.
Would Jackson Dart make sense for them at the end of the first round?
Mm. Do you think that you have, I mean, you've done a lot of reporting on this. Do you think that Sean McVay has the emotional leash to be able to handle this after it was a tricky offseason with Stafford and the contract to begin with, and you had the meeting with Tom Brady on the ski loft and the romantic ski loft in Montana, and then you had the interest from the Giants and a bunch of other teams and Matt Stafford. He came back and chose to come back, obviously, because the other options were terrible. But do you think you have the emotional leeway
Yeah.
and flexibility to be able to be like, oh yeah, by the way, this is your replacement. So let's see how that
Yeah,
goes.
and I don't know. I mean, I think you'd have to have good like and look, like I think Sean very much learned his lesson on that and through the golf thing, and he's
Right.
publicly spoken about that. Like, I think he very much went through that and understands it. And so I think if he was going to do it, then like I think there would be a conversation and it'd be the right thing to do, like to have that conversation with Matthew Stafford because the new contract still hasn't been pushed over the goal line. There's reasons for that, but I think if you have that conversation, you know, I I don't know. I just like I think they're in that age range with him with Matthew where it's if there's somebody that you think can be a long-term starter for you, you really have to consider it,
Yeah, and can he legitimately say like I'm going to play here for 5 more years? No, I don't think
I
so.
don't
Right.
know. No. And I like and that's part of the issue. That's part of why they thought about the way they thought about it. I mean, that's part of why when the Aaron Rodgers possibility at a very steep discount, I think Rodgers would have been willing to go there on a discount. That's why like it intrigued them to some degree is because you look at it if you're them and you're like, we can have him for how much cheaper, and then we can spend that money elsewhere, and we're already year to year with Stafford. So like they wouldn't have really entertained that if they thought Stafford was going to be their quarterback for the next 5 years. But they viewed it as like, well, we're year to year anyway, and Rodgers would be year to year, so like sort of similar. And so I just think I think Stafford's still sort of like a year to year thing, and if you're in that spot, then you have to consider these sorts of things.
Quickly, you mentioned the tight end position. I think one thing that's important to mention, and I think that we see McVay doing it. I think we saw Shanahan struggle to do it, and it's different offenses, yes, but I think it's the same idea. If you have a system that has been dominant for so long, you have to break it, and you have to put it back together again with new parts, because otherwise it becomes at least defendable, more defendable than it was. And I think we saw Kyle try to do that with Trey Lance and
Yeah,
add mobility into that offense. And I
yeah,
think we're definitely seeing that now with McVay, where it's like, okay, I'm going to swap Cooper Kupp for Devontae Adams, different kind of wide receiver, and maybe go after that game breaking tight end in
sure.
the NFL draft.